The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, "This month shall mark for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell the whole congregation of Israel that on the 10th of this month they are to take a lamb for each family, a lamb for each household. If a household is too small for a whole lamb, it shall join its closest neighbor in obtaining one. The lamb shall be divided in proportion to the number of people who eat of it. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a year-old male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep it until the 14th day of this month. Then the whole assembled congregation of Israel shall slaughter it at twilight. They shall take some of the blood and put it on the 2 doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the lamb that same night. They shall eat it roasted over the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted over the fire with its head, legs, and inner organs. You shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. This is how you shall eat it: your loins girded, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it hurriedly. It is the Passover of the Lord. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike down every firstborn in the land of Egypt, both human beings and animals. On all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you live. When I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague shall destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. This day shall be a day of remembrance for you. You shall celebrate it as a festival to the Lord. Throughout your generations, you shall observe it as a perpetual ordinance." So last week, we read the part of Exodus where God appears to Moses in a burning bush. Now, what happens when God speaks to Moses on Mount Horeb is that God tells Moses that he has heard the cry of the Hebrews, that God had observed the misery of the people being oppressed in slavery, that God had seen their suffering at the hands of the harsh taskmasters. And friends, we can know from God's words on Mount Horeb in Exodus chapter 3 that indeed God is a God who hears the cries of suffering people. God feels the suffering and responds. So, we know from that chapter from last week that God has called Moses to return to Egypt. Remember, he's been in Midian after fleeing Egypt. He's made a life for himself. He has a family now. But God has called Moses to return to Egypt, to confront Pharaoh, to deliver the people from the Egyptians, and to lead them to the promised land. Now, this is important. It was important in the beginning, and it's going to be important as we continue our way through Exodus all along the way, including from this moment on Mount Horeb. Moses resists. He challenges God. He feels inferior and ill-equipped for the job. He doubts that it will work. He doubts that the people will pay him any mind, or that Pharaoh will actually do what God has called him to do. So I just want you to remember that through and through, this is a conversation. This is not a one-sided thing where God sort of decrees it from on high and then the people passively respond. This is a give and take all along the way. So we're now in chapter 12. Again, Exodus is a big book. We can't sort of hit everything. We could preach on this for years if we did that. So the lectionary kind of plops us along the way, really at key moments. But because we've skipped a lot of chapters, we kind of have to go over a little bit of what we haven't covered. So between chapter 3 and chapter 12, where we are today, Moses did return to Egypt. God recruits his brother Aaron to help him out. Remember, one of Moses's resistances is like, I'm not a good speaker, I'm not eloquent. So with the help of Aaron, Moses faces Pharaoh. Now the Lord had promised Moses that the words that he needed would be provided in the right moment, and that what he had in his hand, which was really just a simple shepherd's staff, that through what Moses had in his own hand already, God would perform wonders and signs. And so Moses goes to Pharaoh, and he demands that Pharaoh let the people go. But here's what happens. Pharaoh's heart is hard. Pharaoh's heart is hard, and he refuses. And so God sends 10 plagues on Egypt. Now, what we've read today is what God has told the people to do before the 10th plague strikes. You can go back and sort of catch up and read about all of the afflictions that befall the Egyptians. There's bugs and flies and lice and frogs, and the 9th plague is darkness. And so all these things have happened, and every time Pharaoh has refused, right? So we're now past the 9th plague, and the 10th plague is about to strike. And this is what God says is going to happen in the darkness. As people sleep at midnight, the firstborn in all the land of Egypt, from the lowest of low, those who reside in the dungeons, to the son of Pharaoh himself, to all the livestock, the firstborn will be struck down and die. But God speaks to Moses and Aaron, gives them instructions as to what the Israelites are to do in preparation of the plague to ensure their protection. And so this is how the ritual, the liturgy, the festival of Passover begins. Every household is to slaughter a lamb at twilight, and everyone is to have access to this lamb, which will be the meal. Households are instructed to share if one household is unable to provide a lamb. They're to take the blood of the lamb and put it on the doorposts and the frame where they stay. This is the sign of the promise that God will pass over these households, and that the plague of death, which is coming that night, would not touch them. They're instructed to eat the lamb with unleavened bread. And this is also symbolic, because there is no time to wait for the leaven to make the bread rise. In fact, Exodus 12:11 says this: they are to eat this meal with their loins girded, sandals on their feet, staff in hand. In other words, the symbolism is this. In other words, they are to be ready to run. This meal has urgency. God has intended for it to be eaten in a hurry. Everyone who shares this meal must be ready to go, must be ready to travel. But the significance of that is, more importantly than anything, those who share in this meal must be ready to flee the empire. I want to pause really quickly and ask you to reflect for a moment. Again, we're walking our way through this monumental book in the Hebrew Scriptures. And I wish, if you're willing, if you would just type out in the chat right now, if you're watching us live, I'm wondering, are you finding this to be meaningful? And what kind of an impact is it having on you? Like, how are you feeling about us journeying through one single book of the Bible? I'm just curious how it's going for you. So we're dealing with an ancient story. And sometimes it takes a little work to figure out how it connects with our lives today. So here's where I want to take us next. God, as I said, has shown 9 wonders and signs up until this point. Through Moses and Aaron, God has spoken. God has given Pharaoh chance after chance after chance to free the Hebrews, to let God's people go into freedom. And time and time and time and time again, Pharaoh has refused. Now, we could spend a whole session on what the 10th plague is about and why God chooses to take this drastic action. Why God struck down all the firstborns in the land of Egypt. There is so much to this. There's connections to earlier in Exodus, back to the very beginning. It would take more time than I have to spend on this right now, so bear with me, because number one, it's troubling. And I know it's troubling. And if you're not bothered by it a little bit, well, yeah, I won't go there. But it's troubling, right? But I want us to kind of shift our focus somewhere else for the next few minutes. And maybe we can come back to that in a separate video or teaching time. Here's the thing. The entire essence of this ritual, which would become one of the most foundational festivals in the Jewish faith, is that it is to be done in a hurry. So I want us to unpack that a little bit. God commanded the people to be dressed and ready to depart empire when they sit down to this meal. They had to be poised to run in order to take part in it. Walter Brueggemann, one of my favorite Old Testament scholars, I want to read you what he writes about this piece. He says, anybody who has leavened bread is not hurrying. They're not participating in the urgency. That kind of casualness might suggest being at ease in Egypt, where faithful Israel must never be at ease. He goes on to say this: without this festival of urgent departure, the community of faith runs the risk of being excessively and in unseemly ways at home in empire. And in this posture, there will never be departure. Friends, I'm inviting you to reflect on this. In what ways are we at home in empire? In what ways are we at ease in Egypt? And what does it mean for us today to be ready to run? To be ready to leave bondage behind, to be ready to depart the empire. This is dangerous territory. So I'm treading lightly, but I want to go there. I believe that in many ways, We are far too casual and comfortable in a culture that resembles the land of Egypt far more so than the political system to which God has called us to embody as people of faith. Friends, the story of Exodus is this. It is the story of God rejecting and intervening to overcome the politics of empire, the politics of power and hierarchy, and the acceptance that some are just meant to have and that others are just meant to have not. God rejects this acceptance. God is offering an alternative. God is offering covenant relationship that places value on consent, on responsibility of all citizens, a different way of organizing ourselves that insists on dignity and life and equality and justice. What does it mean for us to be at ease in Egypt? And how do we find a place at God's table? How do we make our way to this meal, this festival of urgent departure? How do we know if we are ready to run for freedom? And maybe you're thinking, I'm already free. I don't know who you're talking to. But you know what? I think that we are at ease in Egypt when we get to a place where we work without stopping, where we do not take time for rest. In God's order, there is always Sabbath. Do you allow yourself to stop checking emails at a certain hour? Are you sleeping enough? Are you diligent about taking time off? If the answer is no, or if the answer is, well, there's just too much to do and I can't afford to stop, well, that's what Pharaoh told the taskmasters. Egypt was built on unceasing labor for the purpose of endless accumulation. Are we at ease in Egypt? I'm about to really step on some toes right now, but how many hours are we spending on Facebook and cable news? How does that compare to the number of hours that we are spending in prayer for one another and in scripture and spiritual formation? Are we praying for the people who are ticking us off right now? The ones that we're very quick to demonize? Or are we at ease in Egypt? Look, we're in an election year. I don't know one single person who doesn't have their mind made up already on a whole lot of different things. We're in the middle of an uprising, calls for change and racial justice that we haven't seen in decades. And friends, I'm asking us, are we feeding the division? Are we doing the thing where we are labeling people so that we can write them off? Oh, well, they're just a conservative. They're just a liberal, just a Republican, just a Democrat. Are we shoving people into boxes so that we never have to pursue a real relationship with them? Are we at ease in Egypt? Or are we ready to leave all of that behind? Are we ready for a new vision? Do we yearn for a different way to be able to relate to one another? Are we hungry for freedom, even if we don't even exactly know what that means? Are we hungry for rest, for relief? Do we ache for the chance just to relax? God instituted this new festival with blood and with food. And we know from other places in the Hebrew Bible that in the blood was life, and that freedom must be felt in the fire of our bellies first. Loved ones, beloved of God, we do not think our way into liberation. It starts in our belly. Our body cries out for it, and then we have to feel our way to freedom. And so I'm asking if you long for that. And you know it. You know your body. I'm asking you, where does it ache? Where do you hold the pain? Where do you hold the grief? Where do you hold the anxiety if you think for 1 second that that pain in your shoulder or your neck or your lower back isn't related to what's going on here and what's running through here? Then you are mistaken. I'm asking you, where are you holding it in your body, and what does your body cry out for? Is your body crying out for there to be another way? Another way to live, another way to exist, another way to work, another way for your family, another way for our economy, another way for our society, another way for our church to be? Are you crying out for relief? Do you long for freedom? Are you ready to run? Or are you at ease in Egypt? Are you fine with how things are? I promise you this. God's promise holds. And if you feel like you're in a hurry to get out of this, God is making a way. God is making a way. But you got to be ready to run for it.